Welcome to Build, live in downtown New York City. I'm Ricky Camilleri. Our guest is one of the most innovative documentary filmmakers working today. His last film, Montage of Heck, used the journals, home movies, and demo tapes of a young Kurt Cobain to create a kaleidoscopic portrait of the man's life and body of work. In director Brett Morgen's new film, Jane, he takes a similar approach to his new subject, legendary primatologist Jane Goodall. Using hours and hours of beautiful footage shot from her early expeditions, Morgen's film takes a specific moment in time in the researcher's life to teach us about her work, and life itself. Before we get started, I'd like to remind our audiences at home they can submit a question for our guest using the button right next to the video. Now let's take a look at a trailer for Brett Morgen's new film, Jane.
Day after day, in the sun and the wind and the rain, I climbed into the hills. This was where I was meant to be. The more I learned, the more I realized how like us they were.
Truth is stranger than fiction, and fiction can be transformed into prophecy. Here we have a perfect example of that evolution.
Jane Goodall, tall, blonde, and beautiful.
Living with the chimpanzees in the wilds of Africa.
Were you ever really very frightened?
I thought they were nicer than us. I had no idea of the brutality.
What about the significance of the studies?
There were some who tried to discredit my observations because I was a young, untrained girl. I didn't care what anybody said. They would be sending out a photographer to document the chimpanzees. We both loved being out in nature, and we both loved the work we were doing. We just got on very well. Then, just like that, Geographic ended the funding. It was very upsetting, unfortunate and sad. And it was like, well, what do we do?
How long are you going to be associated with the chimpanzee?
Until I die.
Everybody, please give a warm welcome to writer-director Brett Morgen and his new film, Jane. Writer, director, producer, really, right? Number of credits on this film. So let's start with, you go from The Kid Stays in the Picture to Montage Effect, two great documentaries about prominent entertainers, for lack of a better word. How do you then move to a primatologist? And did it feel like you were doing something different?
Completely, yeah. I mean, well, for one, I think like a film like The Kid Stays in the Picture, I think, about Robert Evans, I was probably looking for a father figure. So I may be the most disoriented person you interview because Bob Evans is a father figure and Jane Goodall is a mother figure. It's very, very confusing. But I had done all these movies about men, and this was a couple years ago, and I was like, why am I only doing films about men? Like, and just for my own growth, I wanted to expand my horizons, and I was looking for this type of story when National Geographic called me. But I didn't think of it, when I say this type of story, my impression was Jane Goodall is like very saccharine and hallmarky, and what happened was I was on the road promoting Montage of Heck, and National Geographic called and said, "Would you be interested in doing a film on Jane Goodall?" And I honestly thought it was like this must be a joke. Why would you hire the guy who did Kurt Cobain to do Jane Goodall? And they explained to me that they found this extensive archive, and we had this great call. I got off the phone, they called back and said, we want to do a second call, and I said, only if you give me final cut. And I figured that would be the end of it, because why would that National Geographic give me the crown jewel of their collection? And then they handed over the crown jewel of their collection. And what's funny is when Jane and I were at the premiere of the film, and I was telling this story, she goes, well, that's odd. I thought I had final cut. I said, well, fortunately, you liked the film, so it all worked out.
Just tell everybody that they have final cut. Hopefully we all come to a consensus at the end together. With Kid Stays in the Picture and with Montage of Heck, you are creating these incredible portraits of these two, one a movie maker, another a musician, and there is a sense of their personal philosophies and how that relates to life and how people live it. But with Jane, you're not dealing with just the personal philosophy, but what she uncovered about apes and what that says about life itself and evolution and man, and there's a lot of science behind it as well. What did that feel like, and did that feel in any way sort of complementary and similar to the themes that you were trying to uncover in your previous work?
I was terrible at science at school. I got to say, like, to me, the science of this film, is perhaps the least interesting component for me.
But that's what I mean. It's there.
It's like I always say that if you're doing a film about if someone comes to me and they say they're doing a film about boxing, I say no, you're not. That's the context. That's the background. What's your film about? And
animal man who can't get along with his wife.
She works with animals. The movie is about it's about passion, and it's about it's a sort of a parable of the Garden of Eden, and it's about all these lofty things. I'd say the one thing it's not about overtly is like if you want to know about Jane's scientific findings, you're much better served reading a book. I think the movie Jane is very much a kind of the experience that Jane has had both at Gombe and in her personal life. And it does, it does address her work and the relationship and the reflections that between her work and her personal life. And one of the interesting things you see in the film is how her observations are then, she'll have these observations of the chimps and then be able to sort of apply them into her own life, as happens with her own child.
Right, forgive me. I guess I wasn't necessarily saying that the film has a ton of science. I meant that it's very what is there is it very complementary to the themes and the story of Jane overall. Yeah. Which is...
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, well, when I make a film, right, the reason the Kid Stays in the Picture, Montage of Heck, look nothing like Jane is I think each film should be a reflection of the subject matter. Yeah. And so Kurt, was very mental, and it was a very... schizophrenic and bombastic film. It was dirty, and it was really, there was almost an inherent violence underneath things. With Jane, it's about listening, it's about lyricism, it's about poetry, it's about just stillness, and so it takes on a very different tenor. And I think that's one of the things as a filmmaker that I like to do is when I'm starting a project, I'll write down a couple adjectives to describe the subject, and then I'll basically say that's the style of the film. So if I were doing a film on you, Ricky, describe yourself. Give me 3 or 4 adjectives for yourself.
3 or 4 adjectives for myself? Yeah. Handsome, gregarious, amazing. Now you made me feel bad by agreeing.
Are these all your friends, Ricky?
No. But the fact that they agreed made me feel really bad for saying that.
So my film about Ricky would be handsome, gregarious, and sneaky.
Oh, sneaky! Interesting.
Yes. Yeah, because you did a little gotcha journalism with me last time we met.
Do it.
This guy right here. Before we did the interview, I'm like, we were doing an interview about Kurt Cobain, Montage of Heck, and I'm like, what are we going to talk about? And he gives me all these questions. So we're going to talk about this, this, and this. As soon as we get on the air, he's like, so let me ask you about Nick Broomfield. I'm like, what the heck? Little gotcha journalism, Ricky.
Nick Broomfield was another documentary filmmaker that did a doc called Kurt and Courtney, and he took umbrage in an interview that I did with him the week before, took umbrage with Montage of Heck. So when I got him on there, I said, what do you think about Nick Broomfield?
So my film about Ricky would also be a little sneaky. There would be a little...
No, that's smart. You got it.
It'd be very handsome. We get Storaro to shoot it.
Should be ugly. Sorry, I meant handsome as a joke. So you sit down. When did they come to you, they say, we've uncovered
I thought we were going to build a bear in here. I literally thought we were coming to build a bear. Anyways, sorry, go ahead, Ricky.
You uncover all Nat Geo uncovers all of this footage, right? Some of it has aired, some of it had aired on Nat Geo over the years, no?
Some of the Jane Goodall, yes. There have been images of Jane Goodall that came out. There, I think, is only one image in our film that had been previously seen.
Was that intentional on your part? Like, you don't want to show anything in the film that has been seen before?
Not really. It was a technical thing that the shots, because it was shot in reversal, all the original footage. So the shots that had been used were then taken and put into a release print. And so for us to use those shots, we would have been like 4 generations down. So we used all the outtakes.
Now you have a. I want to talk more about that in just a second. But you interviewed Jane, and you have her reading from her book. But your shot of the interview with her is brief. Really, at the top of the film, you rarely cut back to her, like I think most other documentary films would do. When did you decide that you were going to do that in the process?
Well,
or did you know right away?
Can I make one more comment about the Build-A-Bear? This font is very much like the Build-A-Bear font.
Is it really?
It is. It's very confusing. And I don't know why we didn't get wired outside while we're putting this mic right up to our mouths, but that's a whole nother story. Your question to me, Ricky.
You're such a filmmaker. You're such a director.
Your question to me, Ricky, just now was what?
My question was the decision to rarely cut, if ever, to cut back to Jane.
Because here's the deal. Okay, I cut my films and then I do the interviews.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. Because then the films are like visually dynamic. See, what happens is a lot of times documentary filmmakers, they'll go do an interview, they'll set the camera up, they'll set up one lighting setup, and they'll ask you questions about everything in your life. And guess what? You have the same shot throughout the whole film. And it makes no sense to me, because if you start talking about something very sad, why isn't the lighting sad? Right. If you start talking about something really happy, why isn't the lighting upbeat? I'm a filmmaker. So to me, my job is to find a visual language to enhance or embellish the oral content, the narrative content of the moment. And so every moment is precious. There's no idea of just, oh, this shot's gonna work for everything. So we cut the films first, then I can do the interview with a sense of where these pieces are gonna come up on camera, and therefore readjust the lighting for that specific moment. With the movie Jane, the idea was that it would look as if we were doing a 2-day interview, that it would start off in the morning, it would go deep into the night, and then there would be like a rebirth. And so that's how it was designed. Unfortunately, when I started to do the interview, I got to day 2, and I realized I made all these mistakes on day 1, and I had to go back and shoot this entire second day with tents over the place we were to pretend it was night. And then as soon as it got to nighttime, I realized I forgot all these questions for daytime. I'm like, this was such a crazy interview. But no, and so the other thing is, if you cut the film first, then you're guaranteed that the film will never be slavish to talking heads.
When did you come up with the Philip Glass score, or contacting Philip Glass to sort of get a score?
So as soon as the movie was handed to me, there were no sound elements at all for the film. It was all silent footage. And so I was like,
I must say, like, it is the most incredible footage you will see in a documentary this year, this footage of Jane that you're working with. She is so stunning. It's so beautifully shot. It's just incredible stuff. But sorry, continue your answer.
I was just thinking, like, it's too bad we already did our poster. That would have been a good quote for the poster, Ricky. A
little clunky and rambling, but sure, yeah.
Oh my God, Ricky, what was your question? I'm so sorry.
Philip Glass.
Oh yes. So Philip. So the movie was conceived, and I sort of wanted it to be the cinematic opera, you know, because there was no sound to anything, and I really didn't want to hear a lot of narration. I didn't even think I was going to be in your interviews. So I said it'll be this like poetic experience. It'll just be music, and it'll be sound design and these beautiful shots. We quickly realized very fast that doesn't work, because in nature films, you have to have context. That's the whole thing. Like, because there are probably about 300 shots of Jane just looking. So if you don't know. If you don't know what's happening out there, you don't know what's happening. So Philip was wonderful. I mean, really, if you're going to do a cinematic opera in America, who else to call but Philip Glass? I did consider buying Eno. We called Eno, and Eno doesn't score to picture, so that sort of took it out of the equation. One of the wonderful things about being a documentary filmmaker is not only the access it gives us to amazing people like Jane Goodall, but also amazing people like Ellen Kiris, our cinematographer, and Philip Glass, the composer. I've been a fan of Philip's my entire career, so as soon as I had a budget that could afford me the opportunity to work with Philip, I seized the moment, and it was an incredible experience.
It's such a specific style of music, and I don't know if it's just because it's always in my head referential to the Koyaanisqatsi films, you know, but the tone of it immediately evokes a sense of the cycle of life.
That's right.
Which is something that I feel like I mean, was that something you were thinking about when you were going for yeah.
Very much, very much. You know, I mean, to me, there was an evolutionary component to the film, and it was more, to me, it was like I said, it was a parable about, it was an Eden. I saw Jane and Hugo's Adam and Eve, And I saw Eden as being so, Gombe being so pure before they arrived. And after they arrived, it became polluted. And I don't mean that in a negative sense about Jane. I mean, Jane and I have talked at great length about this. Today, if it wasn't for Jane, that chimp colony wouldn't even be here today. But they suffered mightily, as you know, because of the interaction with humans. Phillips is kind of like the voice of God. You know, I really feel like, like his music sort of captures that. Usually, it can be a little cold and mechanical for some people. Me, it's sometimes. And what I found so amazing about Jane was it was so warm and emotional. And the first time he handed me cues, he said, "I'm not sure if you noticed, but I think I might be falling in love with Jane."
It's impossible not to when watching the footage.
Sort of hard not to, yeah.
When you're telling a story like this, and I found that you did it also in Montage of Heck, you really kind of pinpoint really like a specific moment in time to tell your story, and then you sort of also find ways to kind of tangentially hit the questions that someone might have about what happened to your subject in the future or where things went. How do you balance that? How do you balance telling the whole story while at the same time telling one small story?
Listen, if you took a script for a documentary film and you reduced it to the dialogue, it's probably like 15, 20 pages, max, right? A book, a good biography on someone like Jane Goodall is going to be 1,400 pages, okay? So that's why so many biographical documentaries feel like Wikipedia. They're just highlights of someone's life. It's critical, for me, if you're going to do a biography, to find a through line of action and to hang your hat on it and to not be worried about these little side streams and these little side notes. And you just got to stay focused and lock in. And that way you'll know where the film should logically end and where it should logically begin.
Is that a difficult focus to maintain, though, when you have a subject that has all these incredible bullet points?
No, you just have, because to me it's criminal to go off path. So you just have to be focused. Here, I'll give you a great example. In Jane. For those of you who don't know the backstory behind Jane Goodall, she arrived in Africa in 1957. She had wanted to live with animals her entire life and write about them. And as soon as she got there, she was there to visit a friend from college in Kenya. And they said, well, if you want to study animals, you should talk to Dr. Louis Leakey. And so Jane called up this museum in Nairobi where Leakey worked. He happened to answer the phone that day because the museum was closed, invited her down. And, Leakey was known as he had a somewhat lecherous reputation. Well, imagine Jane Goodall walks in and is like, oh, all I want to do is study animals. And she looks like this. And Leakey's like, oh, amazing. I got a job opening for you. I think his previous secretary had to leave because he had had an affair with her. And his wife found out and had sent her away. So in comes Jane. So Jane had to endure quite a bit. He was there were numerous sexual advances made towards her. Okay, I thought that this was going to be a critical component to the film, to the story, because it was like she had to overcome so much to live her dream. Now, granted, I'm making this film prior to 2017 and everything that's happening today. So this is 2 years ago, and I'm like, this was so important. It's such an important moment that she didn't compromise herself. She did not compromise her integrity. Her mom might have helped her out a little bit on that front. That's a whole nother story. But so I talked to Jane about it. I wasn't sure if she was going to be open to discuss it, and she totally went there. And I was like, oh, this is going to be great. This is a great piece of film. But that piece, as significant as I thought it would be, sort of precedes our narrative, where our narrative begins.
And then you also have the moment in the narrative right at the beginning, which we even see in the trailer, where she essentially says, I was told I couldn't do this because I'm a girl, which kind of captures that to a degree for the purposes of your narrative.
That's true. I guess to me what I was trying to get at was that as critical and important as I thought that was, if I didn't tell you it, you weren't watching the film wondering where it was, which is why it could be omitted. And it needed to be omitted because it happened before the narrative of our film ended up taking place. So it would have been a backpedal. And it's that type of thing. Listen, a wonderful thing if you're a writer or a director, as soon as you get finished with your first draft, eliminate your favorite scene. Just go ahead and eliminate it. Kill it. I'll tell you why. Because then you realize that nothing is precious and that the sum of the parts is greater than the individual moment. And I think on every film I've ended up omitting my favorite scene early on for that reason, as a sort of psychological play, that just because this shot's great, we're not putting in the film just because it's a great shot.
Do you remember your favorite scene that you omitted from Montage of Heck?
God, yeah. I know. I get very confused about this. I don't know if it may be in the film still. Yeah, it's weird. I get so wrapped up in this. I had to do a Q&A for Montage the other day, and it was like they should have had someone else in the audience do the Q&A, because I'm like, I'm so outside of that world. Someone sent me this thing yesterday on Twitter, like, hey, what do you think of these leaked Nirvana tapes? And I was like, what? Like,
right.
I get so immersed in this stuff, and then particularly with Kurt, because of the experience of making Montage was amazing. I loved every second of it, Ricky. The experience of promoting Montage was terrible. It was horrific. I hated every second of it.
Then you got to deal with
you.
Fan culture.
And you, and people like you, who are coming out, they're trying to get these gotcha journalism and all this shit. No, what happens is, what happens is, like if you sit around.
One question. I don't know if it was gotcha journalism.
Listen, I'm glad you found your way to build. It's a much more family-friendly environment here.
Right, that's right. We can still curse too. So that's
now you tell me.
Oh, my apologies.
Jesus, why didn't you tell me that before, Rick?
Let it rain. Bring it on.
It's Jane Goodall. We don't do that with Jane. If it was Kurt, we would have been very, You
were saying that the promotional process for Montage of Heck was, you hated it. Why?
I was the only one who was fronting the film, and it was about a 6 to 9 month rollout. And I did over 2,700 interviews.
Multiple festivals, right?
50, yeah. We released in over 130 countries.
And HBO released it months and months after a premiere.
And I'll tell you what happened. Now you're going to maybe have your moment, because you may have something here that's newsworthy. So I've never talked about this before, and I'm gonna tell you really what sort of killed that experience for me. We were kind of at the very end of releasing the film. We were deep into its release, and this publication, Talkback, put out this article with a headline by Buzz Osborne from the Melvins saying Montage of Heck is bullshit.
Oh, I remember that.
See? You remember that?
Yeah, because I follow the Melvins. I like their stuff. Yeah.
I do too. And what he was referring to was there is a animated sequence in the film where Kurt talks about losing his virginity to this heavy-set woman, right? And Buzz's argument was, that's bullshit. If that happened, I would have known about it. Well, it's an animated sequence, okay? It's a short story. It's a piece of fiction Kurt wrote. Like everything Kurt did, it's wrapped in metaphors and everything else. It was not presented as a factual thing. In fact, when we were animating it, there was a moment in his narrative where he said, I went down to the train tracks, I put two bricks on me, I lay down on the train track and waited for the train to come. I told the animator, have him up on a hill watching the train, don't put him on the train track. So we create a distancing, so we could tell the audience, footnote to the audience, this isn't literal. Yeah. All right? Now I got a headline that says, Montage of Heck is bullshit. Rolling Stone picks it up. Pitchfork picks it up. NME picks it up. Suddenly, everywhere around the world, Montage of Heck is bullshit. And if you look at Wikipedia today, there's a whole thing, a chapter on the integrity of the film. Now, what was so upsetting about that, on so many levels, was I thought that was emblematic of why Kurt never was able to seek help. Kurt wasn't able to, Chris Novoselic told me when that he didn't know Kurt had any problems whatsoever until they were promoting Nevermind. That Kurt never talked about his problems. Tracy told me Kurt never talked about his problems. Do you think Kurt was pouring his heart and soul out to Buzz Osborne? I really don't think so. That's not what that culture was about. And so for Buzz to say that he didn't, it's like people who knew Kurt were like, I can't believe he was suicidal. Well, really, you should read the journals. You look at everything else. Listen to the lyrics. It's not a fucking joke. And to dismiss that movie, but to have someone have such an illiterate reading of the film and then to turn that into a headline was so disconcerting. And I remember wanting to come out and fight back about it, but we were already kind of done with the film. And the Cobain camp was like, no, let's not respond.
And also fighting back just sort of contributes to the kind of media, this fear of like, oh, now we have a feud and we can play these people off of each other.
I guess so. I mean, listen, I was animate. I was like, fuck this right now. This is ridiculous. And in fact, I'm literally footnoting this. And to make it even worse, Courtney and I at the Tribeca Film Festival did a talk with Neil Strauss. We talked about this in public in front of 1,500 people. And then 2 months later, Montage of Heck is bullshit. And I still have that following the film. So, you know, that stuff, it's like, it's so unnecessary. And it really pollutes. You know, it's like, you know, the other thing about, and I'll say this now because I never talked about the time. The people who believe that, I can't believe I'm doing a Kurt Cobain thing. I promised I would never talk about Kurt after that film. There was a movie that came out at the same time of ours that was this bogus murder conspiracy thing. I forget, Soaked in Bleach, I think it was called. Okay. Right? The people who think that Kurt was murdered, the conspiracy around that, to how anyone could watch Montage of Heck and not understand the root cause of Kurt's mental illness is beyond me. People said to me that I ignored the suicide. The whole film is about the suicide. The entire movie is about why he would have killed himself. I didn't need to show the last week of his life. So,
those that believe in the conspiracy of the murder are people who like to believe in conspiracies and those who can kind of profit off of peddling the conspiracy.
That's true, but they're very vicious. They're vicious. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I had to block. I mean, they were really, you know, I had armed security. I had death threats. I mean, I went to Sundance to premiere the film with I think 4 undercover bodyguards because we had death threats, like serious death threats, that if I showed up to premiere the film, I was going to get killed. Nobody had seen the film yet. What in the world is that about? I'm like, dude, I'm just a filmmaker. I'm just trying to do good. You know, I'm just trying. I don't know Kurt. I never met him. So all I could do is gather all this material up and read it. I had Final Cut. I had no agenda. And then to be able to make a film and to have that sort of those threats over you is just it's unconscionable. But it's unfortunately the culture we live in with the internet, and it's so easy to do these sort of anonymous attacks.
Now I have to ask, going into telling the story of Jane and going back to the.
This has been like promoting Jane, on the other hand, with Jane Goodall.
But my question is, having come from Montage of Heck, where you have this scenario where people are taking a metaphorical scene and taking it very literally, and then critiquing the film based off of their literal interpretation of something that was metaphorical. And you're jumping into this where there's a lot of science around it, as we talked about before. Did you have any nervousness or fear about how you portrayed the science in reference to the sort of grand metaphor of your whole story?
No, and you know, listen, I have no regrets on not only do I not have any regrets on Montage of Heck, it was one of the greatest creative experiences of my life. I would do it over again 100 times. You have to be, I don't want to sound cocky or naive when I say this, but you have to be fearless when you take on these projects. When you're taking on an icon like Jane Goodall or Kurt Cobain, as you're constructing it, you cannot worry about these things. You have to listen to your own muse. You have to follow your own muse. I mean, it sounds weird, man. I definitely felt Kurt's presence in my room. There were times where late at night we would have our little moments, but you try to get as close into your subject's psyche as you can. So, and once you've arrived there, you feel comfortable that I'm doing the right thing. And you just can't worry about that stuff. I mean, listen, all my films and the ones I have on my development slate are about enormous icons. And each one is like, oh boy. I mean, every film I've ever made, the Rolling Stones, Kurt, Jane, it's like, you don't want to mess this one up. You don't want to be the guy who ruined that one. And but you just got to do it. You just got to do it and have faith that your heart's in the right place. And if your heart's in the right place, and also, you know, as Bob Evans says, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And so a lot of the success of these films is lucky, but a lot of it is, you know, a lifetime of preparation.
Yeah, and also being able to recognize an opportunity when it presents itself to you.
Very much so.
Yeah. Let's get some questions from our audience. Who has a question? You.
Hi, thanks
Hello.
for being here. So what kind of advice would you have for like a budding documentarian or filmmaker?
first advice would be to if you are not independently wealthy, to find the highest paying menial job that gives you the most amount of time outside of that, and don't work for anyone. Like, to be a director, you make a film and you're a director. There's no difference. There's no such thing as a student filmmaker. We're all equalized. My student film got nominated for an Academy Award and won the Directors Guild Award. It was called On the Ropes. I had no budget. I had no crew. I think that but I meet people all the time, and to me, the worst path is like you go and work on film sets, and then you get sucked into that, and you become a department head or something. If you want to be the creative person, you only get there by being creative. And so, like, I'll tell people, I'm like, listen, go get a job as a waiter, save your tips, save $37,000 over the course of the first year, and then go make your movie. You know, you guys have it so much easier than we had it. It costs nothing to make a movie. I mean, look at Sean Baker. I mean, it's like you could do movies on your iPhone. So, you know, you have amazing opportunities. But I also think that you have to know who you're making a film for. I think that often too many times people aren't thinking about the end product and where it's going to be seen and where it's going to go and if it's marketable or not. My documentaries, listen, if Kurt Cobain was an anonymous person in Kansas, I probably would not have done the film, and I'll tell you why. Same story, same narrative, because to spend 2.5 years of my life on a film that no one may ever see is something I can't justify. I can't go home and see my 3 kids at night and go, sorry, Daddy was working on this totally indulgent project that nobody in the world is ever going to see, and that's why you don't have a father. Not that it's better. Not that it's better. It's like, hey, you don't get me, but there's this great movie, Jane. No, I mean, it's like one of the craziest things I've ever read is I read this interview with probably the most prominent filmmaker alive today, who had made this last film, and he said, I made this for my children. And I thought to myself, dude, you just spent 3 years on a soundstage in London, away from home, to make this film for your kids. What? Wouldn't it have been better if you just stayed home with your kids? But that also is what attracted...
Was this Hugo?
No, but this is what attracted me to Jane. Because this narrative... See, this is really another part of what the movie Jane is about. Is Jane... You know, when Jane was coming up, and even today, when a woman and a man decide to have a child, it's often the woman who has to give up her career. That's just the way people sort of expect it. Now, imagine what it was like in 1968, right? It was like absolutely expected that Jane would give up her career to have a child. Well, guess what? Jane does not give up her career to have a child. And it's one of, I think, the most powerful moments in the film for audience members, particularly of a certain age and of a certain generation and a certain gender, where it's an actually heroic thing. I have found that one of the biggest challenges in being an artist is trying to be a great artist and a great parent. Yeah. It's impossible. You can be one or the other. You have to pick because they both take time, and there's only so many hours in the day. So that narrative, to me, was very intriguing, as well as this idea of intensive immersion. You know, Jane, one of the things that separated her from every scientist that came before her was she didn't think of the animals as objective others. She saw them as unique individuals that she could relate to. And so she gave them names and all that stuff. And she was heavily criticized. Her goal was to understand their psyche from the inside out. And that is exactly what I try to do with all my films, is get inside my subject's skin. And the Kid Stays in the Picture opens with the line, there are 3 sides to every story, your side, my side, and the truth. Memories shared serve each differently. Isn't someone lying? But I was saying right there, total rejection of objectivity. I'm going to immerse myself in the subjective experience. So Jane and I had this total kinship in terms of our approach to our work, which made the film appealing to me. That's kind of when you're looking for those windows in. So imagine you start off, your first question was about science, and I'm sitting here saying, no, I did a film about Jane Goodall because there was this interesting parallel between being her work and her personal life, and these other intangibles that were intriguing.
I guess going back to the science to try this one more time, with Kid Stays and with Montage of Heck, you have film and you have music to illustrate certain elements of the personality or the themes surrounding your subjects, which I think are probably easier for a filmmaker potentially to wrap their head around or to extrapolate certain themes from the work and put them into their subject. With Jane, you have the science. Was unlocking the themes within the science more difficult for you than unlocking the themes within the sort of songs or films with Kurt and Evans?
No,
Have I made
no,
this
because,
question make sense?
Yeah,
yet?
no, it's fine because there were like a couple things we had to cover, termites and like there's a couple beats, so it wasn't that difficult. Yeah.
Next question.
Hello. Your previous 6 or 7 films you mentioned in one of your interviews have been focused on iconic men, and you also stated that subconsciously maybe you were searching for a father figure. What has it been like to go from these iconic men and now work with a nurturing woman and tell her story, and how is that going to direct your next project?
Okay. This day, 1 year ago, I was in a coma. I had a massive heart attack, January 5th, last year, and flatlined. And I was deep into the making of this film. How I got there at 48 was probably, if you watch Kurt or you watch Bob, that's how I lived my life. I mean, not the drugs, but bombastic. Just sort of a bull in a china shop. And as I came out of the coma, I had to go recuperate. And I went to Hawaii for a few months, and I looked out at the ocean every day, above 1,500 feet above on a cliff. And I was kind of perched in a tree like Jane. And I would sit there and watch clouds all day. And I started to think about the connectivity between the natural world and our world. And the value of just listening and stopping and breathing. And I was able to, I think, go back into the final edit and introduce some of that stuff. And it's interesting because you wonder sometimes why we choose these films. But sometimes they choose us, and we're not sure why. And at that moment, I understood why this was the film. That if I had come out of that coma to do Montage, I would have been a mess. But I came out of it, and I had Jane. And she became my guiding light. She has taught me how to, I started meditating. I started calming down. And I think that the message I take from this film is really sort of, one of them, there's several, is just listen, slow down, and make every moment matter. Make every day count. It sounds cheesy. You mean you don't know when your last day is? I mean, try to stand in line to get popcorn at 7:30 on a Thursday night and then be declared dead 2 minutes later. Yeah. Didn't say goodbye.
So where you had your heart attack?
Yeah, Cine Family last year.
Wow. What movie were you going to see?
I was there to moderate a screening of Tower, the animated documentary.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to. I was right before the movie. I had my heart attack. Yeah. Unfortunately, I was right down the street from Cedars-Sinai. So that saved my life, because I flatlined 4 minutes after. Yeah.
Of course you're serious. Sorry. Yeah.
No,
That's
it's a joke. Just kidding. It's wild. It's really wild. I mean, what's really wild is I had told my wife right before, like literally a couple days beforehand, I said, if by chance, if anything happens to me, this is who I want you to get to finish the film. Now, that's so weird that I would say that, but I kind of had a thing with the editor at that point. I didn't want the editor to finish the film. And it's kind of like, when you get that deep into a film, it's like your child. And so literally it was like, hey, if I get hit by a car, I want to make sure my child is protected. So it was just sort of strange. But then,
That's cool it was that you wanted to finish the film?
Stuart Levy and Connor O'Neill, my editors from Crossfire Hurricane, and my wife Deborah. And so this whole thing, man. We've been on this run with Jane the last 4 months. This wasn't supposed to happen. I'm not even supposed to be here. And I can't tell you how many times I'll look at my wife and say, can you believe we almost missed all this? Because it's been such an exciting, and we talked about promoting Kurt. The difference between promoting Jane, it's life affirming, and it's such a inspirational story, and she's just, I'm in awe of this woman. I mean, so fortunately I wasn't when I was making the film, but at this point I'm so in awe of her. And she's really been, I think, a wonderful friend through my health issues as well.
I think we have time for one more question from our audience right here.
Hi.
Make it good. He just talked about dying, so like, you know.
Now, can I just make one light note?
Yeah.
Okay. I might have had the most unique cinematic experience in history with the movie All That Jazz.
Oh, yeah.
One of my y'all know the movie All That Jazz, the Bob Fosse film? One of my all-time favorite movies. The afternoon I woke up from a coma, when everybody had left my room, I somehow got my phone and watched All That Jazz in the hospital bed, which was, if you know the movie, the most meta experience you can ever have of the movie All That Jazz.
What made you watch All That? Were you already like, was it already?
It was already one of my
films?
favorite movies, and I remembered he died. You know, I was in the hospital. They just told me I had a heart attack. So I remember the film, and I was a smoker.
Right.
And I was staring when I came out of it, man. You know, I saw my pants over there, and as soon as like the doctors left the room, I was looking over there, wondering if my cigarettes were in there.
Yeah.
You know, I'm happy to say I've never had another cigarette. You know, from the time I woke up. But the thought came across there. But it was like watching Jaws over the ocean. You know, watching All That Jazz from your hospital bed after a heart attack.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, now that you got to finish this film, like, has it ever gotten to your brain, like, who you want to, you know, do next, like another subject or a type of person you want to document?
Yeah, I'm deep into my next one, or I should say we're about to launch it. Unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to say, but probably the biggest icon that I've encountered yet, if that's possible. So we'll announce it in the next couple months.
What led you to this person, or the type of icon that this person is? And I'm not trying to get you to spill it. I'm just curious.
It's probably the greatest. I'm going to give it away if I say.
No, don't give it away. Yeah, don't
give it away.
I don't want to do that to you.
But it's
Trying to pull away from my gut.
the most influential artist on my career in my life. Another artist who worked in all sorts of mediums, and you're going to be very excited.
Oh, well, I'm going to ask you as soon as I put this microphone down and we stop.
Tell you off.
How can people see Jane right now? It's still in some theaters. It's playing across the country.
We're in
right?
our 4th month in movie theaters in New York.
Yeah.
It's amazing. This has been incredible. I mean, like, I've never had this experience with a movie where it's played out this long.
See it in the theater. It is.
Please see it in a movie
beautiful.
theater. It's playing movie theaters nationwide. Try to see it in a movie theater, and I think it'll be on National Geographic in the spring.
Everybody, please give a round of applause for the bombastic bull in a china shop.
Not anymore.
Brett Morgen.
Thank you very much.